The promotion comes true. The salary is higher than you ever thought you would earn, higher than your parents ever earned, higher than what your family survived on for years. You open the offer letter, read the number, and something happens. Not relief, not celebration, something else. A tightness in your chest, a voice that says, "Who do you think you are?" Another that whispers, "This is wrong." Not loud, not obvious, but present and insistent. You accept the position. You say thank you. You tell people you are excited, and you are. Part of you is, but another part, one you cannot name, one you have never examined, feels like it is committing a crime. You begin to make small mistakes. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to undermine the success. You spend recklessly on things you do not need. You avoid looking at your account balance. You create crises that require you to drain resources. You find ways to lose what you have gained, not consciously, not deliberately, but consistently. And when someone asks why you are stressed when you are finally making money, you cannot explain it. Because the stress is not about the scarcity anymore. It is about something deeper, something you were never taught to name. Success feels dangerous because somewhere inside you an internal law has been violated, and the punishment has already begun. Today we examine the guilt-wealth mind, the internal system that activates when financial success rises, transforming abundance into moral contamination. We explore how money scripts create invisible ceilings, why upwards mobility can feel like betrayal, and what happens when prosperity violates the terms of your psychological survival. This investigation draws on research into money scripts, class guilt, survival guilt in economic contexts, and the psychology of financial self-sabotage. What we will find is uncomfortable, because if you've recognized yourself here, it means your relationship to money was never about money. It was about permission, and that permission was never granted. As you read this, notice something. When you imagine yourself earning significantly more money than you do now, not fantasy money but real sustainable income, what happens in your body? Not your thoughts, but your sensations. Does your chest tighten? Does a voice immediately begin listing reasons why it would not last? Does guilt appear before gratitude? Does the image feel unstable, dangerous, like something you are not supposed to have? That response is a system, and most people spend their lives obeying it without ever realizing it exists. You were taught how to relate to money long before you understood what money was. Not through lessons, through observation, through the tension in your parents' voices when bills arrived, through the things that were never bought, through the silence that followed requests, through the shame that accompanied need. This is how money scripts form. Unconscious beliefs about money, wealth, worth, and deserving. Beliefs that function as internal laws governing what you are allowed to have, to earn, to keep. Psychologists identify 4 primary money scripts: money avoidance, the belief that money is corrupting, that wealth is immoral; money worship, the belief that more money solves all problems; money status, the belief that self-worth equals net worth; and money vigilance, the belief that money must be hoarded, that spending is dangerous. Most people operate from 1 or 2 of these scripts without awareness. These scripts were written early by people who had their own scripts, and those scripts were passed down not as conscious teaching but as atmospheric pressure. The way your family spoke about people with money, the way they spoke about people without it, the judgments made, the envy concealed, the shame internalized. If your family struggled financially, you likely absorbed one of 2 narratives. Either we are good because we are poor, wealth corrupts, or we are failing because we are poor, Wealth would save us. Both narratives create binds. The first makes success a moral failure. The second makes success a betrayal of the past. And once this pattern is learned, it does not stay in childhood. Children in financially stressed households develop hypervigilance around money. They learn to read the signs, the unopened mail, the tense conversations, the forced smiles when they ask for things. They learn that money is not neutral, it is dangerous, it causes pain, and the way to avoid that pain is to not want, to not ask, and to not expect. This is survival learning, not cognitive, somatic. The body learns that desire is a threat, that ambition activates danger, that success will cost something you cannot afford to lose. And the body does not forget, it does not argue, it reacts. Research into poverty and decision-making shows that financial scarcity creates cognitive load. The mental bandwidth required to navigate chronic insufficiency leaves less capacity for long-term planning, risk assessment, and future orientation. This is not a moral failing. It is a neurological reality. Scarcity rewires the brain for short-term survival. But here is what makes this particularly insidious. When scarcity ends, when income rises, the survival wiring does not automatically update. The nervous system still operates from the old rules, the rules that kept you safe when resources were uncertain. And one of those rules is, do not rise too far, do not separate from the group, do not become the one who left, because leaving means losing, not just materially, relationally, emotionally. Leaving means becoming the one who got out, and getting out means everyone else stayed behind. This is the invisible law. Do not exceed the family income ceiling. Do not violate the collective agreement about what people like us are allowed to have. And when you do, the punishment is automatic. Guilt is not a thought. It is a signal that you have violated a norm, crossed a boundary, broken a rule that matters to the group you belong to. For people conditioned by scarcity, financial success is a violation, not objectively, but internally, because the rule internalized early was, we do not have this. We are not the kind of people who have this, and if you get it, you are no longer one of us. This is class guilt, and it operates differently than other forms of guilt because it is invisible to those who have never experienced it. People raised in financial stability do not develop this internal alarm. For them, success feels like continuation. For those raised in scarcity, success feels like betrayal. Research into upward mobility reveals a pattern called survivor guilt. People who escape poverty or financial instability often experience guilt about leaving others behind. They feel they do not deserve what they have achieved when family members or community members remain in struggle. And this guilt manifests in self-sabotage, in giving money away compulsively, in creating crises that restore scarcity, in refusing to fully occupy their success. The bind is this: you worked to get here, you sacrificed, you earned it, but earning it does not erase the script. The script says, this is not for you, you are pretending, you are a fraud, and soon everyone will know. This is imposter syndrome fused with class guilt, a dual pressure system. Not only do you feel like a fraud professionally, you feel like a fraud economically. Like you were wearing a costume of success that does not fit, that was never meant for you, and the pressure to remove the costume is constant. Psychologists studying financial self-sabotage identify patterns: overspending after income increases, creating tax problems by avoiding financial planning, making high-risk investments that drain resources, lending money without expectation of repayment. These are not random behaviors, they are regulatory mechanisms, ways the system restores the familiar baseline. Because scarcity, though painful, is familiar, and the nervous system prefers familiar pain to unfamiliar safety. If you felt tightness reading that, notice it. Do not change it. But here is what makes guilt particularly dangerous. Guilt is not just emotional, it is relational. It communicates. I have violated the group. I need to repair. I need to return. And the way to return, when the violation is financial, is to eliminate the distance, to bring yourself back down, to prove you have not changed, that you are still loyal, still one of them. This is why people who achieve financial success often find themselves in situations where they are supporting everyone around them, paying for things, solving problems, covering expenses, not because they were asked directly, but because the guilt demands restitution, and restitution means redistributing the success until there is nothing left. From the outside, this looks like generosity. From the inside, it feels like obligation. The system is elegant. Most people never call this guilt. They just call it stress. You are allowed to succeed just enough to help others, but not enough to escape. Because escape would be abandonment, and abandonment is unforgivable. What if the guilt is not about the money, but about the permission you never received? Families are systems, and systems have rules, spoken and unspoken. One of the most powerful unspoken rules in financially stressed families is, no one rises alone. This is not cruelty, this is survival logic. When resources are scarce, the group survives through mutual support, through sharing, through collective endurance, and the person who stops sharing, who keeps resources for themselves, threatens the system. So the system applies pressure, not always through direct confrontation, sometimes through expectation, sometimes through comparison, sometimes through subtle reminders of who you were before success arrived. You have changed. You are not like us anymore. Remember where you came from. These are not neutral observations, they are corrections, attempts to restore you to your designated role within the family structure. Family systems theory identifies roles that stabilize the system: the hero, the scapegoat, the lost child. And when one person attempts to exit their role, the system destabilizes. If your role was the one who would get out, you carry the pressure to succeed on behalf of everyone who did not. But this pressure comes with a condition: your success must benefit them. If your role was the one who struggled, your success threatens the narrative. It suggests that escape was always possible, and this implication is intolerable. So you undermine yourself, not consciously but consistently, because remaining in struggle is loyalty, and loyalty is survival. Psychologists studying economic mobility note that people who rise financially often face relational loss, friends who no longer relate to them, family members who resent their success, communities that view them as traitors. The phrase uppity exists for this reason. It marks someone who has violated class position, who has attempted to rise beyond their designated place, and the punishment for being uppity is exile, not formal, relational, the cold shoulder, the exclusion, the subtle communication that you are no longer welcome in the space you came from. This is the bind. You cannot go back. The life you left is no longer accessible. The income level you escaped feels unbearable now, but you also cannot move forward, because moving forward means accepting that you have left, and accepting that feels like betrayal. So you stay suspended, earning more than you did but not building, not investing, not allowing the success to stabilize, because stability would mean permanence, and permanence would mean you are not going back. But you are not going back. You never were. The only question is whether you will allow yourself to know that. Financial loyalty is not generosity, it is a ransom you pay to avoid exile. Self-sabotage is not failure, it is regulation. The nervous system attempting to restore a baseline that feels safe even when the baseline is painful. For people conditioned by the guilt-wealth bind, financial stability feels unstable. It feels like waiting for the collapse, for the revelation that it was a mistake, that you do not actually deserve this, that someone will notice and take it away. So you take it away first. You control the collapse. You make it predictable. Predictable pain feels safer than uncertain relief. Research into financial psychology identifies the following patterns: creating debt despite higher earnings, making impulsive purchases followed by guilt. The specifics differ, but the function is identical: restore scarcity. The body learned early that accumulation is temporary, that windfalls disappear, that money does not stay, and the body protects you from the pain of sudden loss by preventing accumulation in the first place. If you never have it, you can never lose it. This is why people who receive sudden financial influx, lottery winnings, inheritance, large bonuses, often return to their previous financial state within a few years, not because they lack intelligence or discipline, but because the internal thermostat is set to a specific temperature, and when external conditions exceed that setting, the system activates to restore equilibrium. You spend, you give, you invest poorly, you trust the wrong people, you create crises, not because you want to lose the money, but because having it violates the internal law, and the law must be enforced. Studies of self-sabotage show it often intensifies right at the threshold of permanent change, right when stability becomes possible, because stability means the game is over. The hope that things will return to how they were, that you will return to who you were, dies. And some part of you is not ready for that death. Endings cost more than beginnings. The patterns vary. Some people create relationship chaos that drains resources. Some develop health crises that require expensive care. Some make business decisions that guarantee failure. The specifics differ, but the function is identical. Restore scarcity. Prove the success was temporary. Confirm that you are still the person you always were. Because if you are not that person anymore, who are you? And if you do not belong back there anymore, where do you belong? These are identity questions, not financial ones, and identity questions do not resolve through budgeting or financial literacy. They resolve through examining the stories you were told about who is allowed to have what. One of the most painful aspects of the guilt-wealth bind is that it operates invisibly. People around you see someone who is finally making money but still stressed, still anxious, still unable to relax, and they do not understand, because from the outside the problem appears solved. But the problem was never money, the problem is permission, and no amount of external success grants internal permission if that permission was never part of the original conditioning. So you live in paradox, earning well but feeling poor, having resources but unable to access the relief those resources should provide, successful by external metrics but internally convinced that it is all about to end, and the exhaustion of maintaining that paradox eventually becomes unbearable. This is why achievement never resolves the emptiness, not because you failed, but because it was never the right tool. Underneath every manuscript is a story about deserving, about who is allowed to have wealth and why. And these stories are not neutral, they are moral judgments. Rich people are greedy, money corrupts, wealth is built on exploitation. These are not just observations, they are boundaries, lines that separates us from them, good from bad, deserving from undeserving. And if you internalized these narratives, financial success places you on the wrong side of the line. You become the greedy one, the corrupt one, the exploiter, not because you have done anything wrong, but because you have crossed the boundary. Research into moral psychology reveals that people evaluate wealth not just economically, but ethically. Wealth is seen as evidence of character. Either positively, they work hard, or negatively, they took advantage. There is rarely neutrality. And if you were raised with the narrative that wealth is morally suspect, your own wealth becomes morally contaminating. You feel dirty, not consciously but somatically, as if the money itself carries a stain. This is why people experiencing the guilt-wealth bind often engage in compensatory morality. They donate excessively, they volunteer compulsively, they prove through action that they are still good despite having money, that the wealth has not corrupted them. But the compulsion reveals the bind. If you were secure in your deserving, you would not need to prove it. You would give freely when moved to give, not compulsively to alleviate guilt. The question underneath all of this is simple but unbearable. Do I deserve this? And for many people, the answer learned early was no, not because of anything they did, but because deserving was conditional. It required being a certain kind of person, coming from a certain kind of family, having a certain kind of story, and if your story does not fit the template, you do not fit the category of deserving. Class mobility studies reveal that people who rise economically often describe feeling like impostors in both worlds, too successful to belong where they came from, not polished enough to belong where they arrived, perpetually out of place, perpetually waiting to be found out. If arguments about money feel like arguments about right to exist, you already understand this system. That confusion is part of the bind. This double displacement is exhausting. You cannot relax into success because it feels borrowed, temporary, a mistake that will be corrected, and you cannot return to scarcity because you have seen what is possible. You know now that the limitations were not inevitable. They were structural. But knowing that does not make the guilt go away, because the guilt is not about knowledge. It is about loyalty, about belonging, about whether you are allowed to want more than what your family had. And the answer you were given, implicitly or explicitly, was no. At some point, if you pay attention, you notice the pattern. You notice that every time income rises, something happens to drain it. You notice the guilt that appears when you buy something you want rather than need. You notice the discomfort in your body when someone compliments your success. And you begin to ask, is this really about the money? Or is it about permission I was never given to have the money? Recognizing the bind does not resolve it, but it shifts something. Because once you see the system, you cannot unsee it. You cannot pretend the sabotage is accidental. You cannot pretend the guilt is rational. You begin to understand that the punishment is internal, not external. That the voice saying you do not deserve this is not truth, it is programming. And programming can be examined. This does not mean the guilt disappears. It means you stop obeying it automatically. You notice the impulse to sabotage and you ask, whose voice is this? Whose rule am I enforcing? Often the answer is someone who is no longer here, someone whose circumstances were different, someone who did the best they could with the information they had, but whose manuscripts do not have to be yours. The bind is real, the guilt is real, but the law is not. Not because you change, but because the system is exposed. The law exists in your nervous system, not in reality, and nervous systems can learn new patterns slowly, with difficulty, but possible. Some people, when they recognize the bind, make a decision, not to abandon their family, not to reject their history, but to stop letting the past dictate the future, to stop punishing themselves for surviving, for succeeding, for having more than those who came before. This is not betrayal, this is differentiation. The process of becoming separate enough to live your own life while remaining connected to those who shaped you. And differentiation requires mourning. Mourning the family member you thought you would always be. Mourning the shared struggle that created a bond you are now living. Mourning the simplicity of a narrative that no longer fits. Seeing the ledger is already an act of disobedience. But disobedience in this context is not rebellion, it is clarification. Clarifying that your life is yours, that your income does not belong to the collective unless you choose to share it, that success is not a betrayal unless you make it one, and that the guilt, though powerful, is not the truth. You were taught to feel guilty for having what others do not, for wanting more than what you were given, for succeeding when success was not part of the family script. And you internalized that teaching. You made it part of your nervous system, part of how you evaluate yourself, part of what feels safe and what feels dangerous. The guilt wealth bind is real. The way it operates in your body is real. The sabotage it produces is real. But the law it enforces is not universal. It is conditional. Conditional on staying loyal to a version of yourself that may no longer serve you. What if prosperity is not betrayal? What if the guilt is protecting a bond that no longer requires protection? What if the people you are afraid of disappointing already know you have changed? What if the only person still holding you to the old rules is you? The bind does not dissolve easily. It does not respond to logic or reassurance. It responds to repeated evidence that success does not destroy you, that having money does not make you a different person, that you can prosper and still be connected, still be loyal, still be yourself. But that evidence requires time, and it requires you to stop sabotaging long enough for the success to stabilize, long enough for your nervous system to register, this is not temporary, this is not a mistake, this is real. And real means you have to decide, do you want to stay in the bind or do you want to live outside of it? Only one is yours. If this landed, if you recognize the tightness when success arrives, the guilt when abundance appears, the exhaustion of punishing yourself for surviving, there's more here. Like this and subscribe to the channel if you are beginning to understand that the guilt is not about the money. It is about the permission you never received to have a different life than the one you were born into. Obeying it is the choice. The law is not real, but the cost of obeying it is.